Hello, this is Dr. Christensen from the University of Texas at San Antonio. You're watching Teaching Learning Cast with Piry Herrera and Benjamin Stewart.
Hello and welcome everyone to Teacher Learning Cast. This is episode number 7. Today is April 7th, 2018. My name is Stewart.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Van, for that introduction. Today, it's another Saturday in which we join to talk a little bit about education, teaching, and learning. How you doing, Van?
Excellent, Piry. Getting ready for the fair. The fair is getting ready to kick up here. This is one of the biggest fairs in Mexico. So things are, we've got one more week of class before we close down for 2 weeks to celebrate the fair. People come from all over the world, and we're kind of getting geared up for that. But glad to be here today. This is our weekly broadcast where we talk about different educational topics, usually within the context of the English language classroom, since Piry and I are within that field where we teach pre-service and in-service English language trainers in a BA program, and have a great opportunity to really share some of our experiences and our ideas. And we really encourage all of our listening audience to participate, get involved in the discussion, and there are various ways you can do that. One is to access the Facebook page. We have a Facebook page that is public that's called Teacher Learning Cast, where you can post questions either during the live broadcast or throughout the week. We're constantly monitoring that site, and really want to reach out to everyone to really let us know what you think of what we're discussing, leave suggestions, leave comments. And also, if you want to be part of the show, we're always looking for teachers to be brought into the live hangout. Again, we meet every Saturday morning, and we're always looking for guests to be a part of the conversation. So you can find me at my website at benjaminlstewart.wordpress.com, and you can visit Piry's website at homers2000.wixsite.com/Piry. H-A. That's P-I-R-Y-H-A.
Yes, I kind of found that an easier way to reach us is just to Google Teacher Learning Cast with your name, Benjamin Stewart, or my name, Piry Herrera, and it's kind of a better way to reach us in a simple mode, because you can find in the same search, you are going to find our website, you're going to find the Facebook page for us, and there you can follow the programs. Last time we met was 15 days ago, because later we took a long weekend here in Aguascalientes, and we discussed interesting things about deep learning and kind of a very interesting topic about how learning doesn't stop just at the content, right? And it goes quite beyond, and it's a life learning thing. And we also discussed about some very overface, like an overview as a general thing, an introduction, let's call it that, to planning based on objectives against the activities in the classroom. And today, Benjamin, what do you have for today?
Yeah, and so to really extend this idea of deeper learning, I came across a really good article from Anna Tatsumi, where she addresses the idea of critical thinking. And I wanted to share a few ideas this morning about really how we can bring in this idea of critical thinking in the English language classroom. I think a lot of times when we think about the English language classroom, I think it's very easy to get caught up into maybe the course book, where we typically kind of go through different concepts, maybe page by page. And, course books are wonderful in the way they organize information, and I have nothing against course books, but I think we can also think of maybe other opportunities where we can extend beyond the course book and promote this idea of critical thinking. And so today I want to throw out some ideas and see what you think, PD, and our listening audience about this idea of how we can incorporate or bring in critical thinking skills with our English language learners, really regardless of the level and even regardless of the age. So this particular article, Anna talks about this idea of critical thinking, and one of the reasons why she thinks that critical thinking is important is that she thinks that it really impacts interpersonal skills. She states that by thinking critically, we see things from different angles. Students become more open-minded and empathetic. They become better communicators. They're more inclined to collaborate with their peers and receive and discuss their ideas. Thinking more about students as individuals, it is possible to say that critical thinking helps them to develop their creative side. So this idea of creativity comes into play, where I think most of us kind of see, especially thinking in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, this ultimate goal, really, of our students to be creative, whatever that might look like. How can we promote this idea of creativity in the English language classroom? It also allows students to think more freely and just explore possibilities. And one of my favorite points that she mentions here is the idea that it makes students better decision makers. I mean, I think at the heart of critical thinking really, I think, is this idea of how can we reach out to students in a way that makes them better decision makers. You know, we always think that, well, we don't always think, but I think sometimes it's easy to think that we need to make, as the teachers, all of the decisions in the classroom. But I think it's this idea of turning over to the students the role of making decisions, not only about their own learning, but their daily life in general. If they're thinking about in terms of, you know, getting into a field later on professionally, what kind of decisions they might need to be able to make, right? And so it's really this idea of how can critical thinking be leveraged in a way that makes students better decision makers. So she goes on and she lists out the 6 ways of applying critical thinking. And I want to expand very briefly on some of these through some other websites here. But very briefly, she mentions the first point of really promoting or beginning the first step of critical thinking is to really present a question. Identify the question that needs to be addressed. And in a few minutes, I'll discuss an idea of an essential question from Wiggins and McTighe. I know, Petey, we've discussed this many times, but I think that if you look at any classroom where critical thinking is to be promoted, you have to look at how questions are being used throughout the classroom discourse, not only from the teacher, but how questions are being posed by the students, either to the teacher or amongst themselves. The second point that she mentions is do research on it. She states that it's important that students use reliable sources. So now this idea of, especially in the day of the internet, where some sources are more reliable than others, we have now the infamous term fake news that we hear about all the time. So now we have an idea, we have basically an opportunity for students to now start looking online and making decisions about, is this a reliable source? Is this a source that helps me maybe form an argument or to persuade someone to do something? The third point she mentions here is applies information based on the research. So based on the initial question or the essential question, once they have found this information, how do they apply it, or how do they apply it to some local context? And we've talked a little bit about the importance of setting context in the English language classroom. For me, this third point about applying information really tunes into the idea of, okay, how does this work in this context? Because of course, it's going to differ depending on context. Number 4, analyze it. And I want to talk a little bit about that here, the difference between analyzing and synthesizing information. She just mentions analyzing, but I think I would also throw in synthesizing as well, because I think both of those processes kind of go hand in hand when we think about critical thinking. And finally, drawing conclusions. This might even be predicting what might happen in the future. So students, whatever decisions or conclusions they may make, they may have to think in terms of, okay, well, how might this be different in a different context, or what might happen next in the process? So this idea of kind of looking forward, I think, really applies to this 5th point. And finally, take action, create steps, make decisions, and that are applicable in the initial question. I think for our case in the English language classroom, we can start looking at different products that they produce, whether they're brochures, their presentations, but some sort of authentic performance task where they're actually required to create something that kind of ties in all of the rest of these 5 points that are mentioned here. So really briefly, that critical thinking, I have some other information to share, but Piry, I don't know what you think about this. If you have come across this either in your own teaching or from experiences from your students who are taking practicum courses, if critical thinking comes up, how it comes up, what challenges they face, or you personally.
Well, it's really interesting because this is something I've come across frequently from different angles. Maybe they don't focus that much like with the term critical thinking, but when you look for information about reflecting, about teachers' development, when you look for information about, for example, the topic I'll address later on about talking time, and about different aspects in the classroom, one of the main things that pops up is the importance of having the appropriate question, or having the appropriate mood for students, setting the mood for students to be interested and willing to research and know about whatever you are going to present. The different aspects you mentioned, I kind of reminded also about some of the aspects I will mention about when you talked in the classroom, the students, when you talk to somebody in general, people the main thing is that they just need to know, what is it that you have to say? Why is it relevant to me? And how do I do it? And it's kind of a short synthesis of this whole analysis of critical thinking at the end. If we are talking about something that students or the audience is going to develop or learn, you can spread these 3 questions into the 6 stages that you have, and at the end, that's what it is. Making the right questions, and then knowing why the questions are relevant, doing the research about it, and having an application of it.
Yeah, I think this is a total shift, in my personal opinion, in the way that we plan our classes. Because if you look at these 6 steps that I talked about here, I think one would easily recognize that these 6 steps aren't necessarily going to be implemented in one class, or not even 2 or 3 classes. We're talking about several classes, maybe a week, 2 weeks or more of classroom study that would be required in order to really achieve these 6 steps, to really go after critical thinking in any meaningful and relevant way. So when we talk about the planning stages, I think looking at what that essential question is, and that provides the basis of critical thought, that provides the basis of something that can be thought about and discussed, that can be communicated in some deep way, really, I think, is a total different approach than just looking at it like today I'm going to talk about the present tense, tomorrow I'm going to talk about the past tense, and I think it really changes the way that one plans. And I think if teachers want to take on this idea of critical thinking, it almost requires a different way of, looking at the planning stages instead of looking at maybe your typical scope and sequence that you would find at the beginning of a course book, and really look at it by either activity or problem or situation, and just say, okay, we're going to spend 1 week on this either essential question or this problem or this situation, and then dive into all the linguistic aspects that are required in order for students to achieve that purpose, right? That goal. But I think that's easy to say, hard to do.
Yes, it's really complicated in the sense that this is something frequent with teachers' information. I've been observing this last weeks, and I've seen very good classes and very good skills from the teachers, that they know how to perform certain actions like leading students, organizing groups, or leading the activity. And in general, they are having good performances. But then when it comes to the idea of this critical thinking, like what happened in the classroom is that they tend to have the idea that the teacher, the beginning of the class is having kind of a hook for students, and then having the teacher provide some information in any way, but the teacher providing the information, and then students doing something that they are asked to do with that information, and leaving a little bit aside the critical thinking. So in one way or another, this is what regularly happens. And when we come to the feedback discussion about the observation, the regular answer when I lead them towards the awareness that your plan is based on me, the teacher, are going to show some information, students will do something with it later on, and that's the base of it. The regular answer is, well, that's the way I've been taught my whole life.
Yeah. And I think that really boils down to, a lot of the issues when we're looking at personal change, right? We do what we're familiar with. Maybe we teach the way that we were taught. And yeah, I think that's another topic, but for another day. But I think that in itself speaks volumes, really, as far as really looking at our own biases, because we all have them, and looking at how we can personally, look at change, doing something differently. You mentioned about hooking the class, like at the beginning, typically teachers will set out to hook the audience. And I wanted to just kind of end my short segment here on critical thinking with some maybe more practical things to consider. And this first option here, see, think, wonder. This is one of 3 strategies for encouraging inquiry-based learning that promotes critical thinking skills. And they state here that the purpose of using basically a series of 3 questions is to provide this routine to encourage students to make observations about new topics. Typically, they suggest that this is a good way to maybe even introduce a unit by beginning with the question, what do you see? Followed by a question, what do you think about that? And a third question, what does it make you wonder? So by having these series of questions, I think we can easily see kind of alternatives for implementing these 3 questions. One being typically the teacher asking these questions to the students. Maybe another option in pairs, students asking each other these questions so that there are then exchanges. Students learn to have exchanges back and forth. And then also maybe a third option of maybe a small group where maybe even many Socratic methods might be implemented in the class, where kind of this question and answer, maybe you have even a questioner who is just, his or her role is to just present questions to the small group to generate ideas. But I like these series of 3 questions to begin a unit, because I think it's a good way of kind of forming this idea of reflection with the English language learner and have them become more reflective learners. But I also think, and they don't mention it here on this website, but I think that these same questions can also be used maybe at the end of the learning sequence. Let's say that students are presenting products or some sort of final presentation. They can pose these same questions, maybe to look further into what other possibilities might be that relate to the topic. So I think in research, we do this all the time, where we present findings and then we make suggestions of further research or what are the implications of this going forward. So I think that we can kind of take those same concepts, and again, depending on the level of the student, right? But try to promote these types of thinking skills. You know, I often hear other educators tell me personally, that, a lot of these ideas that we are promoting with critical thinking are too ambitious, that if we're looking at a student that is at a lower level or maybe at a certain age, that they're not going to be able to, or we're not going to be able to incorporate this type of thinking in the classroom. And to that, I would say that I think that we have an obligation as educators to pursue these and really make it our job to consider the context and the profiles of our students, but to promote these ideas of critical thinking, because in real life, they do this all the time. From young kids, they're constantly thinking critically. I think it's our job to recognize how we can bring that into the English language classroom, where in formal education, we also have certain course objectives that we also need to meet.
Yes, and if you allow me to add, I would add to those 3 questions one more, which may be related to the what you think about it, but it would be like, what do you know about it? And meaning, what have you heard? What do you actually know about it? How do you associate this with something, with your prior knowledge? Thinking from the approach of activation, access, and analysis, like activating whatever they may know or associate with. And I think these questions are good leading questions to start making students really have inquiries about whatever the topic is. The other question would be, how do I make these questions so interesting for them so that they are totally engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that trying to begin to learn how to scaffold prior knowledge and future knowledge is about asking the right questions. And these questions that we're posing here, I think, just kind of just really begin the discussion, right? But I think it's finding those right questions. You're absolutely right, Piry, and really we need to find ways to ask those questions or bring in the questions into the classroom. I know in the past that when I have taught thesis seminar, which is a research course where students do primary research, that one of the topics that I find really interesting is just how we ask questions in class. What by recording ourselves, for example, we can easily find out what type of questions we typically ask in class, the sequence of questions, which I have a great interest in, like how do we organize our questions in real time, without really maybe even planning or thinking about it beforehand. How do we present questions to the students? How do questions really become part of our classroom discourse in a way that helps students? And that's something that I think is really worth researching. And because it's not something that I think most of us really think about. I know for myself, I don't really pay attention to the questions that I ask. And the only way that I'm going to know what kind of questions, just to record myself and go back and analyze, what I did. But that's basically, I want to kind of sum it up there. There's some other things here. There's some good books that if you're interested in looking at how to promote critical thinking skills in the classroom, here's a few books. I mentioned the Essential Questions by Wiggins and McTighe. So Essential Questions, this is an excellent book for how to promote critical thinking skills through the use of good questions. This book, the Faulkner, I would recommend as well. Okay, so I think I'll stop there, Piry, for this first segment, but this is something that I'm sure we're going to be talking more about as we get into this in different ways, how we can kind of tackle critical thinking from different perspectives.
Yes, I just want to remind our audience that they can get in contact with us. They can state their opinions in any means. We have our fan page in Facebook, which is Teacher Learning Cast. You just look for it like that in Facebook and you'll get to it. You can also get to Benjamin's website, which is benjaminlstewart.wordpress.com. And you can get to my website, which is homers2000.wixsite.com/PDHA. And if you Google Teacher Learning Cast with Benjamin's name, Teacher Learning Cast Benjamin Stewart, or Teacher Learning Cast Piry Herrera, you can find all of the ways you can get to us. Oh, there you go. We have on the screen, we have the Facebook fan page. And we have the 7 different programs we have had so far with very interesting topics, which are orderly. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly that this morning I posted a few questions regarding critical thinking and challenges that you face, any successes that you have had. So we encourage you to let us know. It doesn't matter if it's after the broadcast. We can always bring in comments, and we really want to bring in your feedback in the show itself as much as possible. So again, feel free to let us know what your experiences are. That's what this is really all about. It's not about us stating how things should be and that the way we think or our opinions are any better than any others. No, it's actually the opposite. We really are just trying to present ideas to begin a discussion. And so we really encourage you to not only feel free to share your ideas, but whether you're an English language learner or a native speaker, that you have the confidence really to share your ideas and to get involved in the discussion. So I just wanted to share that with you. I know our next segment, Piry, you have want to talk about teacher talking time, and I think this is something that also relates to critical thinking, because I think it's really hard for our students to think critically when we are talking all the time. I don't think it works that way. So take it away.
Right. In fact, I think that's a good way to introduce this topic, because it's like getting into a specific example about critical thinking in the classroom from the teacher and from students. It's about, I was associating while you were talking about the critical thinking aspect, I was associating it with how simple actions like talking in the classroom reflect our approach towards the classroom, and how hard it is to implement this critical thinking when our minimal actions are focused towards other kind of teaching, right? Towards giving information, providing information. And the question would be, well, what's the difference with having a book in front of you if the only difference would be audio versus written text, right? Maybe if that's the extreme case, right? But yeah, talking time, teachers' talking time is something I deal with frequently as a reflection of what students, maybe it's what they believe, what they've been taught before, or as somebody told me yesterday, that's the way they teach me in here, in this BA. And that's exactly something to really wonder about this critical thinking, right? And how is that way? Well, talking all the time, having lectures and having expositions from the teacher in which the teacher provides information to students. And well, the first thing is to make a bit of the difference between teacher's talk and teacher's talking time in the classroom, because there are a lot of information. I was looking for information about this just to see if I could find anything like more intriguing and kind of interesting articles for sharing with you. And mostly all of them talk about the same things, but yeah, there's quite a difference between teacher's talk, which is the kind of language the teacher uses, and the register, the characteristics, if the style of speaking from the teacher, which is mostly teacher's talk, right? And it's a whole different. It's related, but it's a whole different issue to address because it has to be related to. Ideally, it will be related to the objectives of the class. And if you want to look at the perspective from Bloom's taxonomy, the degree of learning that you want to impress, to transmit to students. On the other side, we have teachers' talking time, which is pretty much the amount of talking during the class. And here is where I want to stress a little bit, a couple of general ideas, because it's also a deep topic and it can be analyzed like step by step. And I go back to what I just mentioned a while ago during the critical thinking situation. The audience is pretty much interested in what is it that you have to say, why is it relevant to me, and how do I do it? And sometimes teachers tend to go through these aspects in a very rounded way, like going through different paths and taking learners through a lot of explanations and informations. I've come to see practitioners that they actually prepare 2 or 3 ways of explaining something. Now, that's a good thing, to be prepared for an alternative. But the idea for the preparation is that they are almost sure the first one is not going to work. So it's kind of interesting to see when you ask them, okay, so if you kind of sense that it would be difficult and you have an easier way to do it, why did you go through the first way you planned anyway, knowing that it may be a little bit more challenging? And that exactly is one of the small things that happens when teachers take over the time. Explanations, instructions, and all of this, the teaching itself, the message itself may be lost in the way, may be confusing students because of the level of English, yes, because of the topic, but sometimes mostly because of the talking itself. All right. Jeremy Harmer talks about maximizing students' talking time in the classroom with the idea of diminishing teachers-centered classes and raising student-centered approaches, right, in the classroom. There's another guy, right, that's they talk about, even they mention percentages, diminishing the percentage from teachers' talking time to 25% and having the students 75%, doing the 75% of the talk. But I came across a very interesting dissertation for a master's degree in China from Xian Yan. And one of the aspects, I think I read many things that I'm familiar with, and I came across these ideas from Harmer also in this dissertation. But there was one phrase, and I think that makes a very clear point. Yes, we agree with all the experts about the diminishing the talking time, raising students' talking time, having more practice, and we can go deeply into different arguments. But he mentions that the decreasing of the amount of teachers' talk should not be blindly done. I mean, it's not just about, I'm not going to talk, I'm going to raise students' talk. And this is what got to me. I think this phrase it's exactly what links this as an example of critical thinking. Why would you diminish your talking time? Because you are raising students' talking time. How? Through questionings, through making them interested on the topic, but how are you going to make them interested on the topic? Are you going to ask questions that they may not know? Now, if it is a new topic, for sure, there will be a lot of things that they will not know. So are the questions just an opening to your talking time again? I'm going to ask a question that they are not going to answer so I can explain. So that the smart thing in here is, what do I do instead of me talking? And one of the hardest thing is exactly that, to come with ideas for smartly talking when, precisely when presenting something, when you have some new information. And that's where the struggle comes with the students. And I've come with practitioners, and I've come to face some of them that are actually convinced that presentations should be something that the teacher has to master 100%, and it's the teacher's time to be there presenting. And there's no other source of information but whatever the teacher knows and tells the students. What do you think about that? You're mute.
Oops, sorry.
Yep.
I keep thinking about one of our prior episodes with Ken Bauer on the flipped classroom, where we talked about really kind of looking at certain, if you want to call them lecture types of core classes or presentational type of classes, where the teacher typically prepares to dictate certain topics to the students, that those types of events actually become recordings and maybe even uploaded in, let's say, Facebook, for example, or YouTube, where the videos are made available to the students. And the expectation is that they go to those videos outside of class or maybe before class, so that when they come in face to face, they're able to do some more dynamic type of work or activity. And for me, this screams critical thinking. It goes back to this idea of, okay, you know, we as human beings, we need to think about things, and then we articulate or communicate about what we think. So if we don't think about the thinking first, and we're just worried about the communication without the thinking, I think it's just a fool's errand. I think it's an idea that I think we're just missing the point. And I think as English language teachers, again, we are focused on language, of course. We're trying to promote the learning of additional language with our students, but they're also thinking human beings. So I think we need to think about the thinking first in the planning, whether it's through essential questions, through problem-based learning, project-based learning. There are many different ways to look at it, but to kind of look at what we do on a daily basis with language in the grander scheme of things, of what is that overarching goal, that idea, that critical thinking. If it's solving a problem, I mean, that would be the easiest example. Like, let's look at how we can work together as a group and with our students to solve a particular real life problem, and then break down our activities on a daily basis and our language objectives into what can we do on a daily basis to enable them to reach that next step. And we continue that process until they are able to complete that final performance task or solve that particular problem, or at least learn more about a particular problem. Okay, so maybe they don't solve the whole problem, but they can, learn certainly more about that problem. It's really about what Wiggins and McTighe refers to as these understandings. Okay, and it's not the understandings typically from the Bloom's taxonomy, but it's more deeper than that. It's more these essential questions that we pose for deeper understandings, so that they can learn to apply things, they can explain, they can have empathy, they have perspective, they have self-knowledge. Wiggins and McTighe refers to these as elements of understandings or facets of understandings. But it's really about, looking at the different performance verbs that are available in any English or any learning context, and finding out, okay, how today we're going to interpret these certain things. Okay, today we're going to apply these certain things, and really not looking at it from a behavioral objective standpoint, because I don't mean to say that, in our objectives, we should have all these performance objectives listed out. I think it's more complex than that. I think it's more emergent, but I think we need to recognize, okay, today we need to focus a little bit more on self-knowledge, on autonomous learning. Tomorrow we might focus on the application, right? And so that we kind of look at learning more from a historical kind of a series standpoint over time, looking at how we can look and exhaust the different ways of thinking over time. And again, I think it really boils down to how we plan and looking at, I've seen a lot of good course books, but I think there are things that we can go beyond the course book to really bring in some added benefit to the educative experience.
Yes, I think it all goes along. That's why I was saying that this is kind of a very specific example of actions that look simple in the classroom but make a wide difference. The talking time in the classroom, my purpose of this segment, more than getting into the specifics and ideas on how to reduce them and all that, it's pretty much to post the question there. I mean, the situation, to help our viewers reflect on what's happening in your classroom. And this is the view that I see very frequently in language classrooms here in Aguascalientes, at least, which is a high rate of teachers talking time, which doesn't mean like 90% of the class or percentages or whatever you want to mention. It means more time of teacher speaking than students analyzing or really working or applying or asking questions or participating in the classroom. So whatever it is more talking than these actions. And on the other side, the counterpart is that the teacher speaks while students need to be paying attention and grasping whatever they can from the talk. And this is pretty much the general view. Just two actions in most of the part of the classroom. One person with the responsibility of putting out through words everything that the teacher prepare or thinks is the essential part from the teacher's perspective, from his own perspective. And then on the other side, somebody trying to focus attention and get as much information as they can. Pretty much that's the picture. Now, the questions would be, is this really working? Is this effective? How is this, what kind of learning is this approach promoting in students? I mean, there are different questions that rise when you see it from this point of view. Now, having this picture, teacher talking and everybody else just listening and grasping information, trying to focus attention, and the younger they are, the harder it is. Now, what is the alternative? What can I do? And that's something you have to reflect. What do I know as an alternative? Now, if we don't know what's the alternative to that, let's look for one. Let's research into that. Let's talk to somebody. How do you do this? How do you do that? And I'm going to jump straight and to keep on with the line and the topic. I'm going to jump into the experience of the week, which is totally related as one of the examples about what can be done as an alternative. The experience of the week that I brought today, it's pretty much what has been happening in my classes with the practitioners in teaching workshop, which is teaching amongst themselves, simulated classes, but also is happening in teaching assistantship, which is having short interventions in real classrooms. And what is happening there is that students are noticing the importance of material. Material as the alternative for this approach of the teacher speaking and the students just paying attention. And we have come to a point in which we could analyze that if you're planning and during your planning, you prepare your material in such a way that the material is the class itself, that everything is there one way or another, through examples, through short notes, through images, through challenges for students. You can lead the classroom with less talking and more participation from the students in different ways. And I go back to the questions for critical thinking you had, which I immediately related to questions for maintaining attention in the classroom. What can you ask students if you're only speaking? But if you have some material around which they can touch, see, or that create in some way, there are a lot of possibilities. You can ask them about what they see in there, what they know about what they see, how they relate what they see to the topic, and tons and tons of information can gather, which make learning a little bit more meaningful, which helps the question that I made about why is this relevant to me? If you make that connection, material is helping the class not only in the topic, but in the context itself, in the relevance for students, in raising interest and diminishing the talking time. And I don't know if I'm making the point that as to this point, when you see it from this perspective, teacher's talking time is just a symptom on something deeper going on inside the teacher. And making this change of not talking that much and trying to make a class in which there's a balance between my talking and students talking, but not only that, between students talking and students doing, and we analyzing and students asking questions, and all of this balance changes the perspective of teaching. And yes, as the experience of the week leading into that, the preparation of material with the intention of the material is the class itself, and I'm just going to be there to lead or help whenever needed, to maybe start up and tell you where's the beginning and where's the end of whatever I prepare for you today. But then you explore examples, notes, drawings, images, the board, or whatever you brought today.
I think your point about purpose is spot on, and really, of course, as a teacher, we need to have a purpose and recognize it. But more importantly, the students need to recognize it, whether it's been explicitly communicated by the teacher to the students, or whether it's so obvious what the purpose is, right? There's buy-in, right? That they see they're motivated by the purpose of doing what it is. They recognize how it's relevant and so on. I think that point is so important. And again, I think it's easy to say, but I think it's something that we need to reflect on every class, because again, some subjects are going to be more challenging than others for certain students. And, there's a lot of situational, there's a lot of context here involved in when looking at how we present the purpose and really make things as relevant and meaningful as possible. But I keep thinking of, and I say this to students all the time, that what we do as teachers is not important. It's what the students are doing. And I think a lot of times we, as teachers, we think, oh, our role is so important and it's all about us, but really it's not. It's not about us. It's what can we do? How can we create the experience to give students opportunities to learn from those experiences, or to take and be involved in those experiences, where really our job is to create the situation, right? And create the opportunities, and then get out of the way, basically get out of the way, right, and show and try to find ways to move students from being dependent, which certain times they're all going to be dependent in certain cases, to independent onto interdependent, so that they are interdependent in the sense that they are now able to care and help others achieve certain goals and objectives. So it's not about them, that they see their role more as a a link or connection to a bigger, greater thing, right? So I think that's very important that we first are able to recognize our role in that transition for our students, and also, secondly, that we're able to recognize those different levels of dependency, independent and interdependencies, right, that and recognize that certain topics, some students are going to be at different levels. Some are going to be at the interdependent level. Some are going to be a dependent level. I mean, it's very complex. But I think if we're just in tune to that reality, that I think it really changes the way that we approach our classes. I would like to take the last few minutes here to share an experience that I think I can tie in a little bit to our discussions today in critical thinking and teacher talking time. As I am typically teaching students in academic writing, I have a composition course, a 4th semester composition course, where students are currently trying to, or they are developing an academic essay. It's an argumentative essay. And with all of my students, I do this also with my 1st semester, 2nd semester propedeutic students as well, who are also taking a writing class. But I ask them to really look at what I refer to as a problem statement, which is this prompt here that I'm sharing with you now. At the very top, it reads, it begins, "I wish to learn more about." So I have each student write out the topic that they are wanting to write about, that they want to learn more about. So they all begin with the prompt, "I wish to learn more about," and then a topic. And then they all continue the same way with, "because I want to find out," and then they choose typically one key question word. Now, I refer to this as the indirect question, where they now look more specifically about the topic in terms of what it is that they want to write about. They continue on with "in order to," and then they provide some significance. And this really addresses your point, PD, about the purpose, right? So what's the purpose of writing this essay? The purpose of writing this essay is not to get a grade, although that is, what many students tend to think of it as just an assignment. But more importantly, the idea here, especially with academic writing, is to recognize that there should be a significance, right? And who the audience is, to whom are you writing this essay, who's going to be the reader, and their background, what's the relationship between them as the writer and the audience, the reader. And through that conversation or thought process, the idea is that they can come up with a significance. I'll share with you an example of this problem statement that was modified from an example of a student this semester. It begins, "I wish to learn more about authentic materials." So the topic, generally speaking, is authentic materials. Okay. Then the indirect question begins, "because I want to find out how teachers can adapt newspaper articles in a way to support better reading comprehension skills." So the idea is to take the topic that's general, authentic materials, then form an indirect question to find out how teachers can adapt newspaper articles. Newspaper articles being now one particular example of authentic materials, because the topic, of course, of authentic materials is very broad, and etc. So the idea is to break it down to a very specific, doable, writable, topic that they can develop, in this case, a 5-paragraph essay, and also link it, in this case, to a linguistic aspect of reading comprehension. And then the significance, being able to address this problem of students who don't like to read. That's a real life problem that I think most of us face. Students typically do not like to read. So we want to try to address this problem in through the use of authentic materials. Now, the way that I propose this one sentence, we spent several days, and which is very typical. This is not a one sentence, sit down, in 15 minutes, crank out this sentence. The creation of this sentence requires many, I'll say several hours of reading articles. So students need to go and read typically primary research articles to really go in and find the information. Most of this is done outside of class. It involves facilitating and helping students find articles that relate to these topics, finding arguments. I haven't mentioned this, but since this is an argumentative essay, they have to also form an initial argument, counter argument, and a rebuttal. So it's talking about what a claim is and how to bring in those three arguments within the context of this problem statement. So here is where, in my case with these particular students, is I present the prompt and I guide them to find articles. We're lucky enough at the university to have great databases to find articles. So students really have a vast amount of resources that they can find these articles. But it's my role is to really help facilitate them to find the articles. If they have questions, to use maybe certain search terms if they're not able to find certain articles, but really to kind of teach on demand, right? It's kind of like, some students will ask more questions than others, some will need more assistance than others, and it's really just trying to create that atmosphere and situation where they can share this information and I can get out of the way and then teach as needed. That is kind of jump in and help them as possible. Now, I will say that sometimes there are cases where we have to kind of anticipate certain problems or situations where maybe students feel like, oh, okay, I have all this freedom that I can do whatever, and there is a certain degree of intervention that needs to happen so that students are on task, right? So students aren't either wasting time or maybe going a direction that isn't intended based on the objectives of the assignment or of the performance task. And but I think it's something that we need to kind of think about, reflect on, and learn. And as I'm constantly learning, trying to say, okay, how much is too much? How much is not enough? When do I intervene? And so on. And this one example, this experience that I'm sharing with you today, looks totally different by class, right? Even if it's the same course, it looks very different. Reaching this one sentence result will be very different based on the learner. There's so many variables, right, that really go behind this one simple task of creating one sentence that includes these three aspects. But I think that the idea here is to, in my case, present the purpose. Why do they have to do this? Well, this actually becomes the whole basis of their whole essay, right? I mean, this is, if they can't get the problem statement close, everything else becomes even more of a challenge for them. And so my job, I feel, as the educator or the facilitator, is to try to show them the purpose of doing this and the reasoning, and that by writing later on their essay, they can see how doing this problem statement at the beginning is so important.
Oh, yeah, I see a pretty good example about critical thinking here at a kind of a macro level, like a research thing in which they're gonna go and explore and have a lot of knowledge and information and the skills to be developed somehow. And I take it, I was trying to make a connection between that and simple things in the classroom, in the language classroom, in the foreign language classroom, like, but it would work the same. Having the students to focus the class for students on the function of the language feature we are going to use, and looking for the right way for them to get interested on, I would like to know how to achieve this in communication, like this kind of function. I would like to know how to be able to conclude in a proper way an email, let's say. something that would be a micro level in that sense. But it's pretty much it's a good approach what you showed us, because you can kind of readapt it and make the students. Now, the interesting question in here, which is going to give us for more and more and more, but I think we are just on the top of time. It's how do I present this? Which is the format that I present this motivational, purposeful questions or statements to be created, but which is the way that I present it that the students get so into it? Is it, am I only going to ask them to write the sentence or write the question or ask them a question directly? Am I going to bring a proper material or something that it's going to motivate them? And I think that's another kind of topic in the delivery way for this beginning, for this fundamental aspect of, I think, any class, which is raising the right question again. Going back to previous topics, right?
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting in that sense. I think we are on top of time.
Yeah, I just want to make a final comment, kind of as a closing statement, to really encourage teachers, because we've talked a lot today about kind of this idea of inquiry-based learning, or kind of a research-based learning type of approach to critical thinking. And I really encourage all teachers to consider inquiry-based at all levels, because I think even just having, students interview other people, even come up with, just the act of coming up with maybe a simple questionnaire, can be just a very, very simple instrument that they use then later to interview someone else. Just the combination of creating these instruments and getting students to ask and find information and report it. Really, it's all about finding information, kind of analyzing what it means, and then reporting it. But it can be done at a very simple level. It doesn't have to be a research-based approach necessarily. It can be even with kids interviewing, favorite colors with someone, or, different aspects of language that are very, very simple, but it's all within this context of inquiry-based or kind of a research-based approach to education, right? And there's been a lot of research done on this in all levels, not just English language learning, but in all subjects, of this idea of bringing in inquiry-based learning. So just want to throw that out there. Again, we do want to hear from you. If what we're saying is crazy and off base, let us know. We're all, it's all good for us. All feedback is good, and we don't take anything personally. We take everything seriously, though. So let us know. Let us know what you think. Let us know what challenges you face with trying to bring in and incorporate critical thinking into your English language learning classroom. Also about teaching talking time, how you manage it, how you feel about it, and what your perspectives are. You can leave your comments in our Facebook page under Teacher Learning Cast. You can leave comments there. And you can also reach out to us directly if you wish. But we do really appreciate your listening and watching our broadcast, and give us suggestions if there are some topics that you would like us to address in the future. We're all ears, and we certainly encourage those comments as well.
Yes, thank you very much, guys. We are live every Saturday morning at 8:15 in YouTube, in our personal website, so you can reach us there. But we also have the video on demand afterwards. There may be some days there's a gap between the original live transmission and the edited version, which is pretty much just the intro and the outro. But whether you're watching the live transmission or the further on-demand video, leave your comments, questions, and whatever it is, and we like to be in contact with you, and we want to start spreading the word about Teacher Learning Cast. Please like the page, like the YouTube page, share it, and we'll meet you next week, Benjamin.
Absolutely. Thanks, Piry, and thanks, everyone. And we'll see everyone in the next broadcast. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Keep on learning.